2000 Silverado, square bodies, somewhere in the mid-70s. Can we make that work on that? Welcome back to Random Rod Shop, folks. Well, the weather kind of messed up my plans, so we're gonna go left turn. You guys been watching, you know, I narrowed the Silverado rear end so that I could get 6 lugs and disc brakes on the back of my 67, you know, short wide bed. Part of that plan is to figure out how to get 6 lugs with disc brakes on the front. Now I know I can order the rotors, 6 lug replacement rotors for the 5 lugs that's on the square body, right? You use the heavy duty suspension, and eBay, CPP, half a dozen other people. My preference is just to use some factory parts on there. And given I've got a Silverado rear end under it, I would like to have a Silverado front end under it. So let me take this down and let me show you. So this is the front end off of a 1999 Silverado. You can tell the lower control arm is significantly beefier than the square body stuff. One of the things that was interesting to me, because quite honestly, all I've ever had to do to the Silverados is replace that upper control arm. I think maybe I've put on a hub bearing, but I really haven't had to mess with this. I've got 3 of these pickups. It's got close to 300,000 miles, and at this point, all they eat is that upper A-arm. So I got lots of extra, you know, used A-arms running around. Interesting design piece of the Silverado. I don't know if you can see that there, but you see that the spindle, right, the ball joint points down, the spindle bolts from the bottom up. And obviously, you know, it's got a wheel hub, right, rather than a spindle. Let's look at the square body. Now this is sort of a mix and mash, because I didn't have a lower control arm off of a square body out. So this is a control arm off of well, it's probably off of a 71. The difference, if you're interested, the difference on the half tons between the 67 and 72 and the 73 all the way up to 87 is they changed the ball joint size. So in this case, I've got the ball joint, happens to be the ball joint I pulled out of my kid's pickup. We made a video changing the ball joints on that thing. So that's the ball joint out of my kid's 87. It doesn't fit this A-arm, but it serves its purpose in terms of holding the, I just got it poked in on the bottom. I'll show you here in a minute. Poked in the bottom to hold this spindle. So put new upper arms on my kid's pickup. So that's his old upper control arm. And this is a spindle off some square body. I don't know which one it is, but somewhere in the, it's probably between 73 and 80. I don't know how many of the 81 to 87s I've taken apart. Thing to note here, the spindle sets on top of the control arm, right? So on the square bodies, this is the same for the 63 all the way to the 87. Ball joint comes up and the spindle goes down the top of it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to really look these two things over, and we can work our way clear to see if we can put that spindle on these A-arms. So here we go. I think what we're going to do is we're just going to start out by taking some measurements. In my mind, the one that's most critical to me is the steering arm. That one, given that we're going to be modifying the control arms and stuff like that, the steering geometry is the one that probably we're going to have to think about. So both of these are passenger side. They're both front steer. All right, so this is the front and this is the back. Let's see what the steering arm length is. So to help us out, I actually have the driver's side spindle for each one of these. So I'm going to push these back. We're going to put the spindles that's already taken apart up here on the table. All right, we're going to start with the Silverado. So this is the bottom. I made a mark right here for, you know, center line of the hub. And we're going to measure to where the steering connects over here. Now ideally it should be, you know, somewhere around the pivot of the ball joint. So somewhere, I don't know, somewhere about right there. That looks like pretty close to 6 inches. Let's see here. And we'll do the same thing. Okay, that looks like it's about 6.5. All right, so we're gonna have to address that. All right, so the Silverado looks like the steering length is about 6, and on the square body it's about 6.5. So we're gonna have to think about that, because that should be your pitman arm and your steering link too. So I haven't measured those two, but they got to be close. We got to remember that the steering arm is different. All right, I'm gonna put these back down and let's see what else we can measure and figure out here. The other thing I'm interested in is on the upper ball joints. It looks like the square body ball joint has the same taper as the Silverado. It's just that they're not a direct swap, right? Because on this one, the A-arm's below the spindle and that one's above. So totally different animals. But I am curious if the upper ball joints are the same. Here's just a slightly different taper. Let me get a caliper and let's find out what the difference is. This is a square body A-arm on the Silverado. Looks like we might be able to send a reamer down that spindle to probably fit that ball joint. I think the issue is going to be, once we get the ball joint seated, is this going to get in the way of the turning? Because you notice on the Silverado, there's lots of clearance between the steel part and the ball joint, where on the square body, the frame is actually hanging pretty much down there. So I suspect we're going to have to do some clearancing on this side here, but I do think that upper control arm will actually work. Next thing I'm interested in is the kingpin inclination angle. Now, there's a lot of, you know, if you're a race car or, you know, autocross or something like that, you think a lot about these kind of things. And street rods and things that just, you know, just cruise, that's not that big a deal. So, the kingpin inclination angle is this angle right here. Go through the center of the ball joint and the center of that one. And that angle, right, off perpendicular, that's your kingpin inclination. It used to make a lot more sense with the Model A's and T's, right? They had a solid shaft, and that went through a solid axle. So it was, that's why they're called kingpins. If you got an old Ford pickup with the twin I-beam, you've probably had to replace kingpins in it. Anyway, it's the angle between the two ball joints on a, you know, a wishbone suspension. Where that straight line, you know, between them two ball joint holes hits the ground relative to the center of your tire, that distance is called a scrub radius. Now that line can be outside the center line of the tire, it can be inside. And I'll be honest with you, I've forgotten which one's negative and positive, but if you think about it, if the line of motion is outside the center line of the tire, then basically there's always a torque trying to pull the tire out. If it's inside the center line of the tire, there's always a torque trying to twist the tire in. So in general, the factory tries to keep that scrubbed keep it small. Race car guys, that's not my world. I am by far and away not an expert on that. So if any of you guys out there autocrossing or racing, that's a whole different, There's a whole science to that that I don't know. Okay. So, we mess it all up when we put different offset tires and wheels, and the scrub's not gonna, or the kingpin inclination is not gonna cause me a lot of pain, but I would like to know what it is. So, let me scoot this back, and like I say, I've got the driver's side spindles here. Let's see if we can get some idea of what the kingpin inclination angle is. All right, so I've got both of them here. And I've been trying to prep for this video. I played with this earlier, and I think the way to show this is like this. So these are machine surfaces, right? And this is perpendicular to the kingpin axis. So if that's perpendicular, I should be able to measure this angle, and it will be the kingpin axis. So what I want to do is see if I can set this machine surface up as 90 degrees on both of these. I've got 89.8. That looks pretty close to me. Well, give or take, looks like the kingpin is about 11 degrees. Let's see what we can do on this one. Let me find some paper and shim up the back of that. So I got 89.8. That's pretty close to 90. And it looks like I got about 7.5 there. So the Silverado's got, looks like about 11 degree and kingpin inclination angle, and the square body's got about 7.5. Again, like I said, you know, hot rodder's always changing the tires, so the factory setup isn't really a good reference. It's just I wanted to know the difference. That way, when I'm working out the tires and stuff, at least I'll be able to predict close to what it's going to do. All right. All right, the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to know, you know, the height of the spindle. So that on both of them. So we get some idea if we can anticipate having to move the connection points on the cross member. So this is definitely not going to be exact, but I think it'll give us an idea how close they are or how different they are. So remember, on the square body, the spindle is on top of the bottom ball joint, and it's on the bottom of the top ball joint. On the Silverado, the spindle is on the bottom of the ball joint, on the bottom, and it's on the bottom of the ball joint on top. So once again, to kind of look, right, ball joint comes up this way from the bottom and down that way from the top. And on the Silverado, they both come from the top down. So ball joint comes in from the top on the Silverado. So we'll measure from here to here, because it comes in from the top on this one too. Well, that's pretty close to 10 inches on that one. So on the square body, we need to measure from basically outside to outside, because the ball joint comes up from the bottom on the bottom and down from the top on top. That's about 9 inches. So the Silverado spindle is an inch taller and about, what do we say, 3.5 degrees more inclination. In general, the taller spindle should actually be good for the handling side of it. It allows the camber to go ahead and roll in faster usually. I think on this one it's going to do that too. Let's see here. So what it should do, if you make the spindle longer, right, it should bring your upper A-arm up. It should allow the camber to kick in sooner. For this vehicle, I'm not sure it's going to matter. We're just going to drive this thing and look good. So where does that leave us? We obviously can't just use that control arm on the square body. Totally different animals. Let me clear this off. I'll spin them around, and so we can have a look at this. All right, so here's a square body. It's not The ball joint isn't symmetrical on the A, but it's not that far off center line. You know, the center line's about right here, so, you know, it looks like it may be an inch off center line. Here's the Silverado. This is the front. So the center line of the ball joint is right here. I can't come up with any good way without basically totally redesigning the front suspension on the square body to use this one. One last piece, I think, and I forgot to measure this when we had them on the table. Let me put the spindles back up here. So the other piece, and this takes a little more thinking to work through the whole thing. How far is the center line of the spindle from the ball joint? And again, that's not exact science, just kind of get close. Looks like that's about 1.75 inches from a line from, you know, this machine surface to the center line, about the same height I'm going to measure over there. Let's just check this one. This one's about 5 inches. So what does that mean? Well, remember that the spindle is below the ball joint over there and it's above the ball joint over here. So just as a, you know, a rough estimate, let's measure the height of the pad on the bottom of this, and we can subtract that from the 5 inches, because effectively that's how much the center line of the spindle's going to go down, you know, in terms of apples to apples. Again, not exact. So we got about 1.25 inches. So give or take 1.75 inches. 5 minus 1.25 inches, so we got about 3 3/4. So if I'm thinking right, that should be like a 2-inch drop, right? I think so. That should be like a 2-inch drop over the stock spindle. That's not a bad thing. All right, where does that leave us now? Well, I couldn't help myself. I started cutting. So this is the passenger side. I took the driver's side and I just started whacking, trying to figure out what this thing was going to look like. So let me clear the table off and let me show you. All right, I cleaned the table off. Let me show you what I've been up to. So 2 control arms. Now, keep in mind this one's off of a 1/2 ton, but they are interchangeable in terms of dimensions. So I happen to have a 3/4 ton lower control arm that I didn't mind cutting up. I prefer not to cut that one up just yet. And so I basically, you know, cut the ball joint off of the Silverado and then started hacking away and trying to get it mounted into this control arm such that the distance from the center line to center line matches the factory stuff. It don't look pretty at this point, but the thing I discovered was there's too much material here. Now originally I just tried to put the ball joint in the factory, right? Tried to put the ball joint in from the other direction, figuring that we'll figure out how to support it. The problem is there's too much material here to clearance inside this Silverado hub. The factory designed this with that in mind. You know, the black piece here is the Silverado stuff. There's not much hanging out in front of the ball joint. All of that's got to go away. So I set these 2 control arms together and took my hacked out piece and tried to center that in the center of this hole, tacked it all in there, and then I cut the outside mess off. All right, here's a piece I whacked off of it. So the ball joint, that ball joint should be in the exact same place as it was on the square body. And the other piece of this is, I don't know if you can see it there, but that ball joint kicks up. You know, the lower control arm kicks up about right there. And so you have to take into account that angle also. So that's the reason none of this sets square, is I did my best to show that kick up on that on that ball joint. Where I'm at now is, let me set the ball joint on here, or the spindle on here. Let me show you the problem we've run into. Right now I've still got too much material from the old control arm, right? And it's not allowing this thing to turn all the way. Let me show you on the factory one. So when that turns, these stops basically is what sets the turning radius. And because you can see it goes pretty much the whole way to, you know, from that corner right there, you know, maybe, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch from that corner, and maybe a 1/2 inch right there. Let me see if I can get that up here again, and let's have a look. So I've still got, for the most part, I've got this factory corner right here. That's really not a factory corner. This one's close. All right, so you can see that edge is in the way. Relatively speaking, that needs to bump up next to that. So I need to take all of this off on both sides, and then I'll reinforce it back here so that we can see how much we got. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna find me a piece of plate. This isn't the, just in case you're wondering, this isn't the control arm we're gonna end up with. This is all for mock-up. Once we figure out what this thing needs to look like, we'll find another set of control arms and we'll start over. I think, let me see if I can get a measurement on this other control arm, and we'll just whack off what we need to whack off, because there's a stop welded on the other control arm. Let's see how far that stop is out from the side. So here's the stop. There's one on both sides. You can see it down there, and one right there. So let's see if I can get this straight here. So the stop, let's say that's a center line. So the stop is pretty close to the center line back. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the center line here to there. Look like about 1 3/8 inches. I think that's what we're going to go for. It looks like I need to take that whole strip off, right? I need to take the bottom of it off, and still not going to get enough, but let me cut the bottom of this off, and I'm going to go ahead and cut the bottom of this off just to clean everything up. Okay, so I just cut off the lips on this thing, and let's see what it looks like. Well, yeah, I think that may actually work. So, by all accounts, I get a reamer and I reamer this upper ball joint hole. Even with the one thing I guess I probably forgot to mention, the increased angle means that the distance, right, if you look at the triangle, this is further back than this hole to the center line, right? Is further back on the Silverado than it would have been on the C10. But if you guys are familiar with C10s, there is a bunch of shims that get added back between this and the bracket on the cross member, and I think that I can probably take enough shims out to correct for that increased length right there. All right, the next step of this process is, first I'm gonna find a reamer. I don't know that I've got that reamer, so I have to order a reamer. Then I've got a cross member that's already taken apart. I'll bring it up here and set that thing on this table, and we'll get this thing all mounted in there like it's supposed to be, and go through the articulation and see if it's doing anything strange. And along the way, have to figure out how we're going to actually make this lower control arm. This is one of those cases where it'd be really nice if somebody that builds tubular lower control arms would build this setup, because I think this is going to work. All right, so if there's any suspension guys out there, and this is your expertise, and I've said something wrong, or if I've left out something really important, or if you just got a comment on how bad an idea this is, put it in the comments. Well, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Leave a comment. I try to answer all the comments. Leave a like. Until next time, I'm Random at Random Rod Shop, and we're out of here.